Welcome into the live late night Inside Carolina Postgame show. I'm Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. That is Rob Harrington, Carolina 9290. Rob, I dare say that about an hour ago, neither one of us nor anybody in this chat, shout out to the 120 plus in the chat at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, thought we'd be doing a podcast that Carolina won this game after being down 21. Rob, your opening thoughts here.
I had a torrent of insults ready to go at halftime. How many different ways can I defame this team and the effort they put forth in the first half? And to flip it around like that, I thought, they'll make it closer, they'll compete in the second half, but it never occurred to me that they would actually win the game. And the number of storylines to emerge from that win, obviously, I thought Seth Trimble. I know RJ Davis had a great statistical game and was awesome down the stretch, but I thought Seth Trimble was the one who made the plays after Dayton would make a play, sort of kept them in striking range repeatedly. And then, of course, the breakthrough for Drake Powell, which is not going to be statistical in his case, but to play as many minutes as he did, I thought that he made a case to take over at the 4 after a really rough night for Jalen Withers. And then we can talk about all this stuff. But bottom line is, we said last week that Carolina had to get 2 quality wins. We said they would not get credit for moral victories. They got a quality win. They didn't come up short, come back and make it close and come up short. They got over the top. They got the win. So full speed ahead.
Now up over 300 in the live chat. Carolina fans are legit, especially when North Carolina plays like that. Carolina down with 17 and change, down by 21. You mentioned Seth Trimble, and we've got to start with him. I'm looking at the box score. I'm absolutely blown away that RJ had 30. Free throws were huge. But let's talk about Seth first, Rob. We know his story. We know his path here and his work in the offseason and what he's done early in the season. But you mentioned he kept Carolina in the game. He kept making plays. When play after play, Dayton would answer. Trimble kept being that guy. I'm just blown away at his ability and the difference in Seth Trimble in the past 12 months for North Carolina. Just this game specifically, he literally did it all. Hit threes from the corner early, drove, rebounds. What would Carolina look like if Seth Trimble had ended up somewhere else in the portal, Rob? I mean, it's incredible to think about.
I don't think anyone understood what a big deal that was at the time. It was like, oh, great, he's coming back, but it could make or break the team, that decision, and it turns out it might make it. And I thought the second half, a lot of what Trimble did wasn't just that he made positive plays, he made physical plays, because the Heels were so far behind physically in the first half, and including in the second half too. They weren't able to get rebounds, but Trimble was using his shoulders, he was overpowering guys, he was getting to the rim. And I thought that his physicality was infectious, not just the points that he was scoring, but the way that he was scoring them.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that, and I think that's a huge point, because in the first half it was clear, and I tweeted this out earlier. Dayton had a plan. They were going to bully RJ. They were going to bully Elliot Cadeau, and they were going to take advantage of Carolina on the interior, and they did that. The only person they were unable to really bully was Seth Trimble, and then we saw how the second half played out. But the physicality of it, Rob, we got a lot. This is probably going to go longer than normal, even though it's at 2:00 in the morning.
Like we can sleep anyway. We can't sleep anyway.
Yeah,
right?
really. I only have to be up at 7, so I might as well just stay up. But there's almost 500 people in the chat too, by the way. If anybody doubts what college basketball, what Carolina basketball means to the fan base, just look at that number. But Trimble's physicality, I think, to your point, is probably it's bigger than anything, I think, because this is going to be the challenge for North Carolina all season, is dealing with teams that want to get physical on the outside and inside. But just speak to that aspect of him. He takes bumps. He scores in traffic. He rebounds in traffic. He plays tough defense, and he brings that level of physicality that maybe RJ and Elliott struggle with at times. And I think that's the great balance here, to go along with their speed and quickness, his physicality. I think that's what makes this little triumvirate of guards um, even maybe more special than people realize.
I agree with all that, and I think that he brings physicality that even the big guys lack because
Yep.
Hubert Davis, like Roy Williams, wants to play high percentage basketball in the paint. They haven't really figured out yet how to do that at the 4 and the 5. So when Trimble is able to get in there and get those old fashioned 3-point plays, and he's able to, like we said, drop his shoulder, move people around, and without getting offensive foul calls. I mean, you saw the other two guards get frustrated and do that and get called for. But Trimble was able to get a step and lean and get the position, so he's the one drawing a foul rather having it called on him. And I think because they are looking for ways to score at close range, oddly enough, he may be the best bet. Unless and until one of the big guys steps up.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and get the big guys out of the way here. And on these shows, we try to do the good, bad, and ugly, or the positive and the negative. And I think this is going to be a thing all season, is that teams are going, like I said, attack the guards. And Rob, one thing I was thinking about watching when I was watching it, the guards defending the three, you have to be really consistent and really precise with your closeouts because Carolina doesn't have a rim protector back there. And I thought that Dayton was able to take advantage of that with the physical guards, with Posh Alexander. Santos did it. Cheeks did it. The bigs need to be better. Carolina won this game because of Seth Trimble and RJ Davis made plays late. And Drake Powell, and I see the chat. We're going to talk about Drake Powell. But the bigs need to be better here. And I think Jalen Washington did a couple things late that were positive. But is this an ongoing thing, or is this a one-off against a team that maybe the bigs just weren't effective against, Rob?
That's a huge question. I did think Jalen Washington had a very spirited second half. I'm describing it that way because he wasn't consistently effective, but I do think that he brought a competitive presence. They were giving him an opportunity to defend one-on-one in the post. I thought he did a pretty good job. He had some really nice finishes, and they weren't all easy finishes either. And I thought that he rose to the level of competition. He still has not emerged as much of a scoring threat as I would like to see him become, both as a back to the basket guy as well as, of course, the face-up game. I think that can evolve, but I thought this was an important step for him just to show, hey, in this type of competition, when the opponent has a blueprint to try to play bully ball, and it was so effective in the first half, and we're gonna push back on them in the second half, and for that to work, and for him to, I think, establish a little bit of a gap between himself and the other guys, not only including Lubin, but also Withers, who had a real rough game. And I thought that, when you're talking about Hubert Davis setting a rotation, learning about his roster over the course of the week, tonight I think told us a lot.
Yeah, and one thing I thought was interesting is Hubert dropped James Brown in there in the first half, sort of to send a message to Withers and Washington, like, look, you're going to sit and watch if you don't bring it. And looking at the stats, and a lot of people may not know, Seth Trimble, 10 rebounds. RJ Davis, 7 rebounds. Withers and Washington combined for 8. And that is going to be the challenge for this team going forward against teams. I actually thought, Rob, and help me out here, if you think this or not, I thought it was better for Carolina when Zed Key was out there for Dayton, and I thought that foul out was big because it put the big man out there that could shoot threes. And while Washington is not the greatest in one-on-one post defense, the length at least had a factor. But speak to sort of that matchup and then Dayton's ability to shoot it outside there. That was a worry when that transaction happened there. But either way, Carolina's bigs need to be better across the board. Your thoughts before we move on to Drake Powell, as everybody in the chat wants us to talk about.
Yes, no, we'll get there. I was scared about that matchup too. I could see Dayton had shot the ball so well, and it seemed like one of those things where it would you get really close, and then they pull back at the very end. And I was convinced it was sort of like the Illinois shots in 2005. I was like, oh, well, this one's going down. And Luther Head has one, and Darren Williams has one. And they just didn't make them. And they were due to miss some, but it was just sort of that paranoia setting in. And I agreed with you. The other big guy was not too much of a threat. If he wanted to bang bodies down there, that's okay. So I'm with you.
When you look at the stats, I mean, Carolina ends up shooting 52%, Dayton 43%. That's an absolute flip from the first half. Rebounding, Carolina out-rebounds Dayton 37-35. Offensive rebounds, Dayton, which probably kept them the lead longer than they should have had it, as Carolina was coming back 13-8. Second chance points, which were very much flipped in the first half, Carolina ends up winning that. Rob, the turnovers. Let's talk about that. Elliot Cadeau, 6 turnovers. But the key there is he had 6 in the first half. He did not have another one in the second half. Carolina, let me check, make sure I don't misstate it. Carolina had 12 turnovers in the first half, only 3 in the second. What did you see there that was going on that maybe flipped there at halftime?
I thought Cadeau had just a nightmare meltdown of a first half. It reminded me actually of some of the first halves he would have, or some of the early season games last year. And I thought, I don't even know if he's playable in the second half, because he kept making bad plays. His fourth foul was just a reckless play. It was the wrong time to jump on the floor for a ball like that, when they might call it a foul. And I thought it was a perfectly fine call. But then, to his credit, he settled in. He stopped trying to make big plays. He started making sensible plays and bringing the ball up the court so that the other guards were able to do more off the ball and on the catch. And in his presence there, I thought, was instrumental in settling things down. And he got himself under control, which is a sign of his maturity. I want to add here, too, it's probably as good a time as any, talking about the turnovers and foul calls. I will give the officials credit, because I think if they had been afraid to flip that 3-point shot, they could have found it. I mean, it was definitely the right call that they turned into a 2. But I was worried they might say, oh, well, it's inconclusive. You have the red shoes and the red line, if they just didn't want to make a reverse in that situation. So I'll give them credit for coming through and making it what I thought was pretty clearly correct. But sometimes they won't do it, even if they think it's correct. They just don't want to reverse. So I would defend them a little bit. I know no one wants to credit the officials for anything, but sort of circling back to Cadeau, he wasn't getting any benefit of the doubt. I would say that. I thought he was his own worst enemy at times in the first half. But as you mentioned, he did rein it back in. No second half turnovers. The entire team played much better ball control. Certainly, they would not have come back if they had kept throwing it all over the place.
Yeah, and shout out to, and this is going so fast, but Josh Clark in the chat mentioned Marcus Page sort of getting into Cadeau there after the fourth foul. Cadeau, like you mentioned, Cadeau showed those sort of reactions that he had last year, when he would get extremely emotional, whatever you want to call it, frustrated, and Page sort of got into him and put his arm around him and talked to him, and then he settled down. And to your point, that settling and not just managing the game and instead of trying to make a mark on it, settled Carolina in there. Carolina wins 92-90. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Go to them on East Franklin Street or online. Inside Carolina Premium subscribers get 10% off your order. Also, Congruity, Matt at CongruityHR.com. Get your small to mid-sized business assessment. They are great at what they do. Both those businesses are great at what they do. They're both local, and they both have a national presence, because North Carolina fans, are everywhere, and small businesses are everywhere. And Congruity has managed to take advantage of that. With their skills, they can help you as well. Talking with Rob Harrington, almost 700 people in the chat. It is 2:28 on the East Coast. So when I told people, Rob, that we were doing a post-game chat after that, I said 2 o'clock in the morning. I think it's probably the latest one. I bet you there would be, a couple hundred people in here. So shout out to North Carolina fans and Inside Carolina folks for chiming in. I think there's an Auburn fan in the chat. It's either an Auburn fan or somebody talking about Auburn, which is pretty incredible. We're not going to tell you anything you did not see on the TV. Let's talk about RJ Davis, Rob. It was one of those games, and I kept saying when we were watching it here at the house, this is a game that RJ Davis has to win this game. The ball's got to be in his hands late. He's got to make some plays. And RJ stood, I can't believe he had 30. It's another one of those quiet 30s. But he 10 of 11 free throws, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 turnovers, but 8 for 19 from the field, 4 for 10 from 3. What kind of growth did you see from RJ tonight, especially when you consider the first 3 games of the season, 4 games of the season?
I thought prior to this point, he was having, it looked to me like he wasn't getting lost in the competition. This is a phrase that Roy Williams would use all the time, sort of losing yourself in the game. And he seemed to, we talked about how the roles were changing last week when we did the preview show, and he hadn't really settled into the new role yet. I don't think he was resisting it. It just wasn't comfortable. Tonight, I thought he lost himself in the competition, and he just put the cape back on, like, okay, we're going to do this like we did last year. We're going to win this one, and then I'll settle into my new role later. But we're going to win this game. And I thought, he has had moments where he's done that. I thought late the Elon game too, where they were in a little bit of trouble. He did the same thing. Tonight he did it for a longer stretch. I think I saw the goggles come out. That I thought it was only a brief, just briefly. I was like, okay, he's back. He's feeling good. He's throwing up the goggles. He's in the game. Obviously, the free throws were critical. I mean, people take that for granted, but when he's gone, I think you'll see the difference. I mean, because if you can just get him the ball, and the other team knows, they don't want to foul him. You could see the long faces every time they fouled him late because you knew he was going to make the free throws, and he did. And it puts so much pressure on a team that's trying to come back late when you have to, whatever you do, you cannot let him get the ball because he's probably going to make them, and he did. And so I thought that his leadership is evolving. He isn't the most vocal leader I think we've ever seen, but certainly from a play perspective, he brought that tonight. And I thought that he also, despite the fact that, I said he put on a cape, and in some respects he did, but he still was playing unselfishly, and he still was passing the ball around, and Cadeau would have control of the offense, and Trimble would have his turn, which we've already discussed was so important to the team's offense.
And you talk about the vocal aspect of it. Some friends of mine were at the Bahamas last year, and they were down on the courtside. And shout out if they're watching this. I doubt they are, at least live. But they said how quiet that he and really Baycott were on the floor as far as that type leadership. And they're different kinds of leadership, though. There's different kinds of leadership where you get the ball to the guy that, like you mentioned, is going to make the foul shots. I don't think people realize the pressure in making foul shots when you have to absolutely have them. You go back to the 2022 Final Four and Mark Williams, who the not Mark Williams is in the chat, who's a regular person here. He misses 2 free throws in that game that maybe Duke wins that game if you make those free throws. It's the same situation every time RJ steps up there late tonight, and it's not the same scale. I get it. But the fact of the matter is you make the free throws, you give your team a chance to win. RJ 10 for 11, Seth Trimble 5 for 5, Elliot Cadeau 6 for 8, and then it kind of goes down from there. Rob, when we talk about halftime speeches, what is Hubert Davis doing at half that they haven't figured out how to bottle and put in the – here's my theory, and I could be totally wrong. Probably am. The initial scout, especially early in the season, is difficult simply because teams can do things differently than you've seen already on tape. And we talk about tape a lot in football, and then at halftime – you've seen what they're doing in the first half, and you have the ability to adjust on the fly. Hubert Davis can take some criticism for whatever people want to say. I don't think you can take any criticism at Hubert Davis for his halftime adjustments.
Whatever they're doing. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, because what you were about to say, whatever they're doing at halftime, they're pretty much nailing it consistently. And they've done it all season. They did it at Kansas. We talked about on the show what Carolina could be at Kansas. Well, this is again what Carolina can be the second half. What is happening in that locker room and with those coaches and those adjustments that make such a huge difference?
It's sort of, I mean, of course, we don't know exactly what's happening in there, and it's bittersweet because on the one hand, it's impressive that they're able to engineer these turnarounds, but on the other hand, to come out and play defense like that in the first half, which will cause them to lose games if they don't clean that up, because this is now a pattern where the opponent is now outplaying them just in terms of effort in the first half. So they have to turn that around. But something is happening at halftime, whether it is I'm challenging you to play for pride, or they do seem to be making some rotational changes. Seemed like pretty early in the second half they were determined. They started the same guys the second half, but they got away from that pretty quickly. And I think some of that may be that Hubert Davis is a tinkerer by nature, both in terms of personnel and in terms of how they will change up defenses and offenses. I thought defensively they were much more honest in the second half in terms of not switching so predictably. I would have to watch it again to say that for sure. So there seems to be some X's and O's changes. There seems to, certainly some personnel changes, and more than that, they're juicing the energy level with something they're doing at the half.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to watch, and you figure this team's dead in the water, and then they come out and do that. Um, Cade Tyson had a couple good moments, made some free throws. He still looks like he's overmatched and out of place. Ian Jackson made a couple plays. He's going to bring it. But that brings me to who everybody wants us to talk about, and that's Drake Powell. I'll give a shout out to Joey Powell, no relation. Clearly, because the athletic ability is like as far apart as you could ever get between Joey and Drake. But Joey said he would be like a 3-3-3-3 guy, or a 4-4-4-4 guy. Even on the 3-pointer that turned into a 2-pointer that made, his defense was as good as you can get.
It was perfect.
There. Yeah, I mean, and the guy just made a shot. But just sort of speak to Drake Powell. There's a reason that this guy may average 6 or 8 points a game, and he's so high up on the NBA draft scales. He never looks flustered. He does the things. He's a lot taller and longer than people realize. Rob, speak to Drake Powell and his ability and his impact on this game specifically.
I will tell you what has impressed me, and I guess I'm not that surprised by it, but he makes a lot of smart basketball plays for a guy who's just a handful of games into his career. Very quickly, he has figured out what competition is at this level, and defensively, he gives the team a lot of versatility. I think that was, a critical part of their being able to get some stops in the second half, because he is great at switching. He also is able to duck in and then help and recover, and he has great length. I mean, as you mentioned, his defense on that last three was picture perfect, and he didn't risk fouling. That's what I mean. He doesn't make poor choices, and I want to not say too much more negative about Withers, because I feel like I've had a go at him tonight. But this was a rough game for him, and this is he's his fifth year of college basketball. Now you have a guy who's just starting, and already he played in a more trustworthy way. Drake Powell is, even if he hadn't made the jump shots, and I still don't think his shot looks great, but you give him credit. He's stepped up confidently, and he was willing to take that shot. So I give him credit for that, in addition to all the other things he was doing. But for me, when you were desperate for someone to help you at hybrid forward, because as you mentioned, K. Tyson's had a slow start, Withers is up and down. The other big guys don't really seem well suited for it. Someone's got to take command of that position, and certainly he made a case in the second half. I think he may have played the last 15 or so minutes without coming out, and that's Hubert Davis being Hubert Davis, saying, I'm not going to mess with what's working. I'm not dealing with you other guys anymore. This is his game. And it wouldn't be that surprising to me if it starts to trend in that direction.
Yeah, there's a lot of talking. I'll throw up some things. Drake is a natural. He is. He looks like he belongs on the court. There's no hesitation. There's no nervousness, or at least it shows. And you're right. That's one thing I think that goes and I mentioned it when I asked you the question, you talked about that defense on three-pointer, that is giant. Because even if that's a 2, that's a foul by everybody else we've seen, and then that's a tie ball game there. And when you look at those type plays, it's just a big deal. Shout out to Dave Lawson, chat, keeping us in Insomniac's company, too hyped up to sleep. Yeah, 767 of you guys are in here. And this is another funny one, Rob. This is a great thing about doing these live. All the 5 stages of grief over the last 2 hours. Incredible performance by North Carolina. We're talking with Rob Harrington here on the Inside Carolina Postgame Show. Rob, we're going to get out of here, but we must talk about Auburn. I will freely admit, I fell asleep on that game. And Auburn was not winning. Auburn did not look like they belonged on the same court at times.
It was pretty similar, actually, the 2 games.
It was the exact same ball game. Your take on what North Carolina needs to do? I guess that game's at 11 p.m. Eastern, so we'll be doing this a little bit earlier.
We get a half-hour break.
Yeah. So your thoughts on Carolina's matchup there? I think Carolina can do some things with Auburn. Auburn's got some size at the guard position and all that. But after today, the way North Carolina was able to combat the physicality with Dayton's guards, I think it bodes well for Carolina against a team like Auburn.
I think it certainly was a confidence booster. You know, Auburn certainly would have scouted them and seen, okay, we're gonna max out physicality with these guys, just like everyone else is going to do. And so that will be the challenge. And they have Broom down in there, and how does Carolina deal with that? Probably will result in a lot of doubling and some open threes. And we talked about this in the preseason. We talked about this a month ago. I think the thing that they will have to give up in order to defend properly, in order to defend the interior competently, they're going to have to give up some open shots. I thought the shots that Dayton got tonight are probably indicative of the shots a lot of their opponents will get. But that's how your guards get all those rebounds, because they need RJ Davis and Seth Trimble to crash the glass. They need help. And with that help, they're going to have to give up something in exchange. And I think the thing that they will give up is threes. Auburn has been very efficient so far, actually on both ends. So this is a huge challenge. I don't feel like it's a critical win, and I wouldn't put it in quite the same category as the Kansas game, for example, where I thought, okay, this is probably asking too much too soon in that environment. This is a game where I expect the Heels to be competitive, and it shouldn't be considered a huge upset if they win. But I like that they got one quality win already. I think they can go into that game more confidently and bring in the intensity in the first half. There can be no excuses for being flat, because now they probably will be a slight underdog going in. This isn't a game that people will be expecting them to come out victoriously. And they've got to bring the intensity in the first half. That's what I'm looking for in the matchup, is I want the Heels to play their game, get to the foul line a lot with the guards, put a lot of pressure getting downhill, and see if you can run these guys some, because that isn't Auburn's game as much.
Yeah, Carolina gets the late game again tomorrow night, or tonight, whenever it is. Shout out to Gregory Hall in the chat. I know he's on the East Coast now, and he's a West Coast guy. He's also an Auburn guy. Auburn turned Carolina. Shout out to the 753 people that have been in the chat the entire time. When folks wonder what Carolina fans want to see, they want to see teams that play hard, that win, and they want to see Inside Carolina Lives. We'll be back tomorrow night. That's Rob Harrington. Rob, I'll let you get the final word. Anything else you want to say about this one? I feel like, and I said it during the game, if Carolina can figure out how to come back and win this game, it'll be one of the best wins I've seen in a long time. Just because of how the game's gone, the disadvantages they had early, the foul trouble. Your closing thoughts before we get out of here.
Yes, I mean, you sort of touched on it already, with all the struggles that they had in this game, and sort of more generally as we're learning more and more about NIL challenges, both basketball and football, and with all the stuff with NIL and the transfer portal, all those things have changed. But what you got tonight in that second half was a little bit of Dean Smith second half magic, and I think that's why there are nearly 1,000 people in the chat, and that's why so many people are remembering something, and this reminded you, how could you not see that in the second half where the Heels are just determined to come back and pull something out they really shouldn't have been able to do. Certainly it reminded me of the Dean Smith days, and I enjoyed it immensely.
Indeed. Carolina beats Dayton 92-90, plays Auburn in the late game. We'll be back in less than 24 hours here in the Inside Carolina Postgame show. I'm Tommy Ashley, again, Johnny T-shirt and Congruity. And again, it's all about the fans. Shout out to the 700 plus that joined us at 2 o'clock in the morning. We're signing out of here at 2:44 a.m. We'll see you again soon, folks. Thanks. Everybody be safe. Get some sleep. We'll talk again soon.